All right, today I'm here with Norman Virtue. Norman, thank you so much for joining me this morning. And by the looks of your hat, you served in Vietnam, is that correct?
I did.
Were you a Marine?
No, Army.
Army, okay. So what'd you do in the Army?
Helicopter pilot.
Helicopter pilot.
I flew both, but mostly helicopters.
Wow. So is that something that did you get drafted?
No, in fact, I was in 8 years before I went to flight school and became a helicopter pilot. So I was in the combat engineers and worked in, they put me in a floating bridge company and I served there for, a little over 3 years.
Explain real quick, because most people probably don't know what a floating bridge company is.
Okay, it's a bridge company and they have a fleet of trucks that hauls this bridge, and it's kind of like an erector set. You put it together. And the first one we had was, they call it M4T, no, that was a steel treadway. Anyway, it had big wide steel treadways, one on each side. It had big floats you'd put in the water and aired them up, and we had a big air compressor on the back of the truck. And then you put the decking down and you could actually run tanks across that thing.
Wow.
It was rated at 60 ton, which is what the M60 tank weighed.
Wow.
So you could run the M60.
How quick did you guys get that thing put together?
Well, depending on how wide the river or whatever,
Yeah.
but we were pretty fast with it. We practiced quite a lot.
I figured you would.
And they had a wooden treadway down the middle for foot soldiers. So you could run, no telling how much, tank one right after the other across that thing.
Wow.
Great big floats. They had rubber, about that thick. And that old air compressor made a lot of noise. Leroy 210 air compressor. Great big thing.
I bet it was loud.
On a 2.5 ton truck. That's all that truck would haul, that air compressor.
Wow.
I drove a truck in that company, and then the first sergeant wanted to know if anybody would like to volunteer for a job as company clerk, because the two clerks were draftees and they were leaving, going back to the States. We was in Germany. And I said, yeah, I'll volunteer for that. And my platoon sergeant said, you're nuts. You can't do that. I said, them two guys both got college educations. I said, if the first sergeant, if he's the boss, he knows what he's doing. If he thinks I can do it, hey, I'm on board with that. So he tried to talk me out of it, but I said, no, I'm going. And interviewed with the first sergeant, and he said, well, you can go up to the education center and take typing classes or something in the morning. In the afternoons, you work in here as an understudy. And when those guys leave, then you go take over mail clerk and company clerk. Why they had two of them in there, I don't know. But nonetheless, I did both jobs, which was no great big deal. But he told me, he said, okay, if you take the job, he said, you stay there till you get qualified to be promoted, and then I'll put you back in the bridge platoon where you get legal for you to be promoted. And he did. I was there, I think, 8 months or 9 months, and they transferred me back to the bridge platoon, and I did get promoted right away. And I come back to the States, went down to Fort Polk, Louisiana, and I was a sergeant E5, and walked in the company commander's office, and he said, man, I hate to put you out there on the bridge platoon. He said, the best you can come up with is assistant driver on a truck. I got so many sergeants and NCOs, I don't know what to do with them. And I said, well, I guess that's the breaks. He said, but I see you've been a company clerk for a while. And I said, yeah. And he said, you think you could handle the job in the personnel office? And I said, yeah, no problem. I've been in and out of the personnel office the whole time I was a company clerk. I can do that. Well, we went up to group headquarters and talked to Mr. Beckwith. Said he's hurting for help. And I did, and boy, what a mess. They hadn't had anybody in that desk for a long time, and had a whole bunch of people that come back from overseas. They hadn't even had their travel pay processed.
Wow.
Or their dislocation allowance, and no pay. So Mr. Beckwith said, well, he wasn't even a personnel officer, he was a quartermaster officer. So he said, now, you're going to have to process all them records. And he said, on top of that, at the end of the month, we're going to be paid on a pay voucher, not a pay roster like we've always been doing. So each individual will get a copy of his pay voucher. And I said, that sounds cool. He said, yeah, you're the one who's going to make out the pay voucher. I never even heard of that thing. He said, well, like I told you, it's a job. And I mean, there's 2 stacks of records like that on the desk, and those guys hadn't been paid. I need to get them paid, plus learn how to do this pay voucher thing.
Going forward.
So, but then I knew enough about regulations to know where to find the instructions, and I got the finance regulation was a great big thick thing. I mean, it was a little big book. And I got that thing and started reading it, and once I finally got in the groove here processing those guys, and for their travel pay, you had to go to the joint travel regulation, which covered all the government. And so I soon found out when I was a part of that, I could negotiate that. So I got every one of those guys paid by the end of the month. and about wore my car out going up to the finance office and back, and learned how to do that travel voucher thing. They gave me a box about so high, then things were 3 copies, and they were folded up. You just pull them out, put them in your typewriter, and just keep them running them through. And you had to put on all the basic information, name, rank, serial number, all that stuff, so they'd know how to pay them. And everybody got paid. But I had a line standing outside my office on payday. There was people who didn't think they got the right pay. They wasn't used to that. They was being used to pay officers say, here's $75 out, you know.
Yeah.
And of course they didn't realize what was involved in that. But we had a clothing allowance and dependence allowance and that kind of stuff. So I had that pretty well figured out anyway. But I did get them all paid, and I got all those guys took care of within a couple of days. Everybody was satisfied with their pay.
That's awesome.
And but meanwhile, I took that stuff home with me at night. I take a typewriter and all the papers I thought we could finish. My wife would help me do it at night at home. And I'd come back to work the next day and haul my typewriter and then get back to work. And they closed that place. We moved it to Fort Sam Houston. And while I was in Germany, my platoon sergeant that didn't want me to try to be a company clerk, I heard him talking about they had a school you'd go to be a helicopter pilot and a warrant officer at the same deal. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to look into that. So once I got settled in at Fort Sam Houston, I worked in the post headquarters for a while, and then they moved us out to our separate personnel office. But anyway, I started checking on that, and I decided I can handle that. Well, it was closed to active duty. Reservists only could go to flight school. And personnel was and cooks, personnel clerks, and auto mechanics were just, you couldn't get promoted. They had way too many of them from Korea, coming back from Korea. So I thought, well, while that flight school had been passed around, I'll just go to aircraft maintenance school. And I was working for a colonel who was really a nice guy. And I mean, the man had a level head on his shoulders. And I was also working for a warrant officer who sat right behind me. And I told him what I wanted to do, and he said, well, let me go talk to the colonel and see what he thinks. He said, that's what he wants to do, and that's, of course, they had circulars come out every so often, and they'd recommend that commanders screen their people and find out anybody that wants to retrain out of an overage MOS to a shortage, and which I was a classic example.
Mm-hmm.
And so Mr. Gunn, he went and talked to the colonel. The colonel said, that's a good project for you. See, that man goes to maintenance school. So I got that done, and I had to have his help a time or two. And while I was down there, I took basic aircraft maintenance and helicopter maintenance. And the week that we finished, they announced mail call, flight school was open back up. Boy, I beat it right back to San Antonio, and started my application. It took a year
To get in?
Yeah, those people didn't. People in personnel back in those days, they thought if a soldier asked for something, turn it down, because he'll get better shape than I'm in if he gets it. So I had to fight my way through that, but I had that full colonel behind me and that warrant officer. So the battles didn't last very long. When they started telling me no, I just called up one of those guys, and they read in the right act, and away we went. But it took a year.
Wow.
Of course, you had to get the physical, and I mean the physical. Class 1 took a week to do it, and several interviews, and just a lot of paperwork, and I finally got it done. And I went to Camp Walters, Texas, and flew. Anyway, there was H-23, Hiller H-23 is actually it's a 3-place helicopter. It's a kind of a bubble on it.
Uh-huh.
But the Army only allowed 2 people to be in it. And I went through that, and then left there and went to Fort Rucker, and there's 50 some of those. Well, they took off 23 or 24 of our class and started their first armed helicopter training that the Army ever had. This was in 64 or 62. Sent those guys up to Fort Sill, Oklahoma to learn gunnery in helicopters, and sent us for our advanced training was just whatever they had available. Well, we got over there, and they didn't have very many of these H-34s, which is really a good 18-passenger helicopter. And there was about 50 of us. So I don't know how they selected them. Well, I do know, too. I finally found out how they did it. Anyway, everybody just, I'm going to get to fly that 34. It's got a lot of power. And the others was H-19, which would just barely get off the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And so I happened to be they put 8 people in the H-34s, and I happened to be one of those that got selected to fly the H-34. What they did is they started at the bottom of the alphabet and went up 8 spaces and said, that's the 34 school, the rest of them turkeys were.
They're all by your last name.
Oh, yeah. First time I ever got a
That's what I was going to say. Your last name starts with a V your whole life. You're always at the end. Not this time. Of course, the Army would do it backwards. It's hilarious.
So anyway, they did that, and that thing had, like I said, had lots of power. And graduated from there and went to Germany into an aircraft company. They had them H-13s, which is a little 2-place helicopter with the little tail boom looks like a TV tower.
Yeah.
They had some of them, which I wasn't qualified in at that time. The only thing I was qualified in was the 34 that they had. And wasn't there very long. I got transitioned into that H-13. Guy took me out and gave me a check ride. He said, go out and practice 10 hours and come back and I'll give you another check ride and you're qualified. Well, while we was on that flight, the tower called us and said, hey, who is that? So this major was my instructor. He told me who it was, and the airfield commander was on the phone. He said, you get that thing on the ground, you're in wind 10 miles an hour beyond what that thing's supposed to handle. Okay, so we landed and tied the blades down, and he said, well, try to pick good weather, just go out anytime you want to fly, just because we had several of them sitting there, nobody flying them. He said, just go get one and fly around and practice and have fun for 10 hours and come back and somebody will give you a check ride, which they did. So then they were in the process of making a battalion out of this. So there was a helicopter company, transportation company down at Munich, and they were going to bring it up to there and join our division. It wasn't even in our division. And then we was going to have a general aviation company would have them H-13s and Hueys and airplanes, L-19s and L-20s, and these H-34 helicopters, and they had 18 of them. So we went down there, 4 of us went down and met the commander and the executive officer and flew 4 of them back up to Nuremberg. And we operated out of there for a while. We got our missions from the company down there. They'd call us up and say, okay, go pick up this and this, all this. So we really had it made. There was nobody bothering us. And there was operations also we didn't like. But anyway, they had a deal over there when the division went to the training area to train tanks and APCs and all that. They had a live fire training area called Grafenwehr, and a whole bunch went up there. Well, they needed pretty much courier service between all these different little towns where they come from up there. And being a junior aviator, they stuck me on that thing, and I didn't have enough hours to fly first pilot and carry passengers, so I flew with every strap hanger and cotton picking outfits, people that didn't normally fly. And I'd be their co-pilot for a while. Finally, I flew with this old boy. I knew him down at Fort Rucker. He's an old one also, Benny Crocker. So they put me flying with Benny. I just needed a few more hours to qualify to be first pilot. And old Benny said, "Time we get back, you'll have your hours." And that was interesting. That guy was something else. Everybody in the Army knew Benny. Bullshit Benny, they called him.
That's probably why everybody knew him.
Yeah, everybody knew him. But anyway, then I flew that career, just like I said, and then I got just about everybody for a co-pilot. I mean, some guys that didn't fly very rarely, and that's okay with me. And then they moved us, those 4 helicopters, moved the outfit from Munich, and us those 4 to a place called Ansbach, about 20 miles from Nuremberg. And we had our own hangar and offices and the whole shooting match down there. So I flew missions out of there, but our commander was different. And he knocked on my door one morning about 4 o'clock, got me out of bed. He was a major, and I was a brand new W-1 warrant officer. And he said, well, when you go to work, he said, you're going to be, you know where the maintenance office is? I said, sure. He said, well, that's your office now. He said, you're now the maintenance officer. And I said, what? Yeah, I said, Joe's leaving, going over to sport maintenance, and he recommended you, so we ain't got nobody else that we think could fill the bill. So I said, well, okay. I was in the process of bootlegging the instrument ticket. We didn't get instrument training, just familiarization in flight school. And my instructor told me, whatever you do, make them let you train for an instrument license, because they kill a lot of people in Germany because the weather changes so quick. You could have 3 fronts in that little big country at one time. He said, you get over there and make them get you an instant life, because you're going to get killed. He said, they're killing people over there left and right because they send people out in weather they can't fly in. So I was in the process of doing that, and so I said, Major, I'm right in the middle of my instrument training. I get up at 3 o'clock every cotton picking morning and go out there and have to have the helicopter back and refueled and crew chief fed by work call. I ain't stupid, I know that. You can handle both. Get after it. So I did, and then they sent us to Norway. They had a NATO exercise. The NATO was trying to get themselves organized for some air mobility, because they'd done the air mobility test down at Benning, Georgia, and it was turned out to be a success. And a general named Hamilton House was responsible for that. But anyway, they got in fuss about how you're going to move troops up in the tundra, up inside the Arctic Circle. And they had Oculus sleds and skis. Well, the Army said, we can do it better than a helicopter. They said, you're nuts. You can't fly helicopters and that stuff. You watch. Well, we got that job. There's several transportation companies in Germany, but they decided we was the ones going to do it. Now, I don't know who decided that, but anyway, they come in there and told me and my boss, said, you guys got to have, out of them 18, we got to have a minimum of 15 of them flyable by the 1st of March, and we're going to Norway. I'm going to fly them to Norway, do that exercise, fly them back. Can't do it. I mean, our parts priority was so low, there's no way we could get them things all put together. We had 3 or 4 down for parts all the time. And they said, well, they got us a higher priority for parts, and then we didn't have a auxiliary power unit to start them with. We were starting them on a battery. The thing was never intended to be started on a battery. They were all supposed to use an APU that had a big plug-in out there. Mm-hmm. The Army didn't have any. Too tight to buy them. So we had some, but they were stuff the Air Force had turned in for salvage. And they had a little 4-cylinder engine on them, a great big generator. I mean, them things were anxious. And they were run part of the time they didn't. About as much trouble keeping them running as keep the helicopter going. So we told them, those things were not going to cut it up there in that cold weather. I mean, they're water cooled and just not going to cut it. So they bought a bunch of off-the-shelf little cheap APUs that would start an aircraft, 24 volt. And I think we had 4 or 5 of them. By the time we finished that operation, 1 of them was running. Them things were cheap. I mean, little Briggs and Stratton motors. They didn't last worth a hoot. But we went up there and done that operation. Now, we got to Copenhagen, and they canceled our clearance across Sweden. So we was going to have to go out over the water to go up there. And the State Department said, oh, no, you ain't. You ain't flying them single-engine aircraft out over water. That water's 32 degrees, and if they have to set it down for any reason, those guys will be dead in a minute and a half. You cannot survive that. Well, we'll put them in wetsuits. They said, that don't make any difference. You got about 3 minutes in a wetsuit in that cold water. You ain't going to do it. Well, they fussed and argued, and finally they got us motel accommodations in Copenhagen, and it was a pretty elaborate motel. It had a big restaurant that you had to get reservations on weekends to eat in that restaurant, even if you lived there. And it was right down the street from the embassy.
That's cool. Well,
we banged around up there for a little while, and finally they said, okay, we're going to bring C-124 Globemasters up there. You're going to take them helicopters apart and put them in a 124, fly them up there and put them back together. And I told my boss, I said, Hogan, I'm going to go jump off an overpass somewhere. I don't want to do that.
Sounds like a good name.
So they had, unbeknownst to me and him either one, a long time ago, they had organized a rescue party in Germany, people in different outfits. There'd be 3 or 4 mechanics in this one, 2 or 3 in this one, that was supposed to go help any kind of a challenge like that. So they sent 29 mechanics up there, and 2 captains. And our support maintenance, the guy that I took his place, he had about 25 mechanics, and I had maybe that many. So we decided that, we was in Copenhagen, and they said, okay, we're going to send Hamilton up to Norway to put them back together. You're going to take them apart and load them into 124s, and he's going to put them back together up there and test fly them. And I said, well, whatever you say. Also, they give me $3,000 cash so I can buy emergency fuel or food on the way up there, and had it in my briefcase. Well, by the time we got ready to go, we'd been in Copenhagen so long, all them troops were out of money, and I had to pay them a temporary pay. And I told them, I just can't do that. It's not legal. Never mind. I'm a lieutenant colonel. I'm in charge of this outfit. I'm telling you to do it. You ain't got no choice. I said, okay, we'll do it. Well, we got up there, did the operation, and to bring them back, I had to do the same thing. I had to disassemble them, drag them up in the C-124 with a cable. We took the rotor blades off, took the landing gear off, and the tail boom, and set them in a big old crash cradle, they called it. It would fit in there and had a place to mount it because they built them things for recovery. And they had several of them. And so we took them apart, sent them back down there, and Joe went down to Stuttgart to put them back together, and I stayed up there to take them all apart. So I stayed there the longest. I was on the last plane out of there. And rode back down to Germany and put them suckers back together. And took them home. The one I flew going up there had been in an accident, and we had rebuilt it, but it didn't have all of its radios. So I had no contact with the guys the whole flight. Me and the crew chief could talk to each other, but I couldn't talk to nobody else. I just had to watch what they done. And we hauled a generator and a bunch of stuff in that one. But I tell you what, I didn't want to go through that again. We ate, this at a little place called Bardufoss, Norway, had a commercial terminal, and it was also an Air Force base for the Norwegians. There's a big cave at the end of the runway, and those guys come out of that cave with them F-86s, firewall would hit the runway and take off, and they were running back in the same way. Well, the weather was so bad, the ice up there on the runway was about 8 inches deep.
Wow.
They plowed it 24/7, but it still built up about 8 inches.
Oh,
this was in March, and,
yeah.
and the snowbanks on each side of the runway was 12 foot high. And the parking ramp, you couldn't see, if you're going someplace, you couldn't see nothing where you were going, this big high snowbanks. And I had some stuff I needed to get done by a machine shop, and they sent a Norwegian lieutenant out there. And he got me in his car and took me downtown. We got that stuff done. And there, those guys could choose to stay in a particular station and freeze their promotion. They couldn't be promoted. They could stay there the rest of their life if they wanted to. And this guy had done that. He was a lieutenant, and he'd been there like 12 years in Bardufoss, Norway. The main menu up there was sardines. We ate in the terminal till we ate all the food. We ate all the bacon and eggs and sausage and that kind of stuff. And they was flying it in when passenger planes would come in. They'd bring in more, but we just kept eating it up. But I ate most of the time in the Norwegian mess hall. And they just had a great big long table, and they'd open about 100 cans of sardines, every variety of them. And then down at the end of that, there was goose liver pate in a little round can. And they had that set out there. And the Norwegians, because that was a hardship tour for them, 6 months at a time. And they thought if you was going to survive that and keep your protein up, you had to eat this goose liver pate. And it wasn't too bad. I ate quite a bit of it. I ate a lot of sardines because I like sardines.
Yeah.
But at noon, they had a big old pot, almost as big as this table, not that deep, and that was whale stew. They had potatoes and carrots and whatever in there, chunks of whale meat about that big. And that's the only warm meal you got in that place. The rest of it was sardines and some toast that you could see through.
Whale stew.
Whale stew.
Unbelievable.
Kind of like beef.
Yeah.
Stringy.
Well, now I'm hungry.
Yeah. But it was good.
Well, Norman, thank you so much for coming to lunch with me today.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you so much for sharing your story with me. I'm sure there's a lot more, but like you mentioned, I'm hungry. Food's here, and it's time to eat. So,
I go on.
but above all, thank you so much for your service. I really appreciate it.
Well, I enjoyed it. I just I decided.
Let me ask you one more question. Did you, after you got out of the service, did you fly anymore? Did you ever do any more flying?
No, because I had 6 kids at home. Well, one in college and 5 at home, and a little old farm down there to try to build up.
Yeah.
I didn't have time to fly.
Yeah.
I
When
mean,
you have your own spot and your own land, it's a 24/7.
actually, I went to school to be a flight instructor in there. I had a flight instructor license and a commercial and airplanes. I have a single engine airplane commercial license and a flight instructor, and I had a commercial license in helicopters and a instrument rating in helicopters.
That's awesome.
And but I just didn't have time to do it.
Kids.
But I loved every bit of it. I mean, I had more fun.
Well, thank you for your
Very
service.
few people enjoyed their.
It seems like you got a lot of different aspects of military service.
Well, I did. I had a great big variety, and it
Yeah.
wasn't time to get bored at anything.
That's true. Well, thank you again, sir.
In Vietnam, I was a maintenance officer, and the company commander would come over every night and visit me about 10 or 11 o'clock, because I didn't get off work till midnight or 2 o'clock. But I had a great commander, and he'd come over and visit with me a little bit. And I didn't mind it. That's working was better than laying around wishing I wasn't there. So.
Yeah, that's true.
I had to recover aircraft when they went down and fix them.
Send them back out.
Yep.
Well, thank you so much again, sir. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome.